Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Program Noted with the Newark Symphony Orchestra. My name is Niki Purdy. I am your host, and I am happy to be here with you today. I am the principal bass player in the bass section of the orchestra, and I also sit on the board of directors, and I'm the chair of the Education and Outreach Committee. And with me today, I have Simeone Tartaglione, who is a wonderful music director. He also is the music director of the Delaware Youth Symphony Orchestra and is the head of the orchestral instruments and conducting division at Catholic University. Simeone, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Niki. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, of course. It's always good to talk to you. So we have a very interesting program coming up. The Musical Montage is what it is being billed as. And we've got a couple of pieces coming back from our archives, which is always exciting. And we've got Swan Lake, a 2017 performance with the Delaware Dance Company that is going to be revisited on this concert. I have happy memories of recording that. And then also we've got the Borodin from 2014, the Polovetsian dances, right? Is that the one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very exciting. What are your memories of that concert?
That concert was really phenomenal because it was one of the examples of what made, in many ways, our last few years so successful in terms of audience and excitement. It was a big collaboration. In that concert, we had a band, a brass band collaborating with us, with Russell Mulray, who is the director there, and then two choirs. So we had our orchestra and three other big organizations all on one stage. It was a very crowded stage, and of course, thanks to independent size, we could easily fit all these two choirs and two basically symphonic groups. It was a big challenge to put together all these groups because 4 different music directors, so we needed to coordinate many things. And the Polovetsian dances were a very nice example. I remember I went down to rehearse with the Southern Delaware Choral Society down there, and then I rehearsed with the other group up here, and then
County, right?
Say it again?
Cecil County was the other part, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and then I rehearsed with them, and then we put them together with piano still, so no orchestra yet. So before we went in front of the orchestra, there was a lot of behind the scene thing. We did one rehearsal all together with piano, and then we got in front of the orchestra for the first time. And of course, the orchestra was super ready, and we had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, it's always such an interesting experience. So that concert was NSO, Chesapeake Brass Band, the Southern Delaware Choral Society, and also the Cecil County Choral Society, which is a massive amount of musicians to put on one program. It's always such an interesting experience because you're dealing with it from this perspective of coordinating all of these different ensembles, trying to work with different music directors, which I would imagine is difficult just sometimes from an artistic perspective, even though everyone is incredibly talented. If different ensembles are preparing things under different batons, they're going to come with different musical ideas, and then you've got to stitch it all together. But from the orchestra's perspective, we've been working with you and we've been preparing for weeks before, same thing, before the choirs had come in. And it's such a live experience getting that many people together on stage. It's so exciting from the perspective of, at least an orchestral musician.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when you have so many people, you need to use a lot of space on stage. And that implies that the distances between the musicians are incredible, much bigger than usual. And that means there's going to be a lot of delay. So each group who's used to hear something and react at a certain time, that perspective gets changed right away because they are not anymore in the same distance from whatever is the usual other instruments. So the delay is usually the trauma that we face in that thing, especially the choirs. They go by ear, they hear the orchestra, and then they are way behind. So I remember, especially I told them, but still, until you get there with their, with your ears, you cannot believe how much you need to really anticipate everything and to be together. Basically, the percentage between watching and listening changes every time according to the distance. And in a situation like that concert, watching was like 70% and listening went down to 30-40% because listening usually brings you late.
Yeah, by the time it gets out to the audience, it's not lined up. And it's independent school. It's such an interesting hall to play in because it's so big, which is cool because it gives us the opportunity to do big programs like that. But it really does create a huge difference between what is happening at the very, so sitting principal basically lined up with you on the outside edge of the stage, although I wasn't in 2014. But from that point to like the farthest back, like alto in the middle of the upper row, the alto section, that's 40 or 50 feet of distance, so there really is a delay once it gets out to the audience. It's such an interesting experience to work.
I honestly think it's much more than 40.
Yeah.
I think it's more.
Yeah.
But we did it, and you can see in this recording, it's quite exciting together, and all the balance issue, I think we solved quite well, and the orchestra played with the fire and speed. This piece, the Borodin, is really one of the most favorite because apart from having some of the melody that everybody loves, they even use this music for a musical. There's a musical in America, I remember, that they use like Stranger in Paradise. There's famous song that people knows in English. They didn't even know come from Borodin Polovetsian dances. So that makes the piece even more famous, because it is known everywhere because of that kind of use they had in even publicity, all other stuff. It was used all the time.
That's awesome.
Of course, I know people will love the other Russian guy, the Tchaikovsky with the Swan Lake. It was nice to put this thing together because even in history, they were like a little bit apart. Tchaikovsky was considered the guy who was following the Western, traditional French, way to compose, while Borodin was a member of the Five with the Russian authentic melodies and construction. In reality, Tchaikovsky is as Russian as Borodin, and the differences exist, of course, but they really belong to the same big country. So it's good to have them in the same program, I think.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the recording. There's one last thing I want to ask you about the Borodin. Watching that video back, there's a moment where you have the choir do something kind of interesting. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you would call it extended technique, but there's a moment where you have them, I believe it's do something with their hands, right?
Yeah. That was for the men. There is a spot where the men in this piece that is, there are dances in this eastern far place where Prince Igor was a prisoner, and they were calling Khan, the king of their land. You need the men to be really powerful, and but as always, as we know, the men in every choir are less than the women. So no matter how you join many choirs, still the balance is not ideal because there are less men singing in many choirs than women. So a technique I learned actually at Peabody from one of my teachers was to enhance voices, especially of men, use the cone. So they were singing, holding the music, and then with the other hand, holding like this, and it really worked. It looked funny, but actually it's a real technique. It's strange that this is the technique that in Sicily is used by in old times. I don't know they do anymore, but when I was a kid, there was people selling fruit and vegetables on the street going on, and that was the way they were singing their products. So I remember that when I went back to Peabody, they gave me that I would never think that was a technique I could use in a classical performance, but I could recognize exactly the people there in Sicily doing that.
It's an effective technique. It works. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. I have such happy memories of that concert. I'm excited we're going to see some of that again. We also have on this program one of our absolutely fabulous youth concerto runner-ups. I believe this one is, let's see, it's Nicole Sullivan-Cozza, right, on this one?
Yeah, Nicolette, yeah.
The Hindemith Viola Concerto, the Swan Turner. And there's a fabulous interview that Anna Monteo did with her, also on our YouTube channel. If you're interested, please go check that out after you finish this podcast. But Hindemith, what a character.
Yeah. Hindemith really has a very central place in music history in many ways, especially as a cultural man that did so many things at the super highest level. First of all, he was a violin and a violist of a first caliber. You know, he was like concertmaster. He was super soloist. The Walton Viola Concerto, probably one of the most difficult piece, was premiered by Hindemith. So he was like in the forefront of that. He was also an incredible educator. He was a teacher for many institutions, both in Berlin and here in America, but also he was an organizer. He was working with Ataturk, the leader in Turkey who did the revolution in Turkey, and he basically established the music, classical music tradition there in many ways, founding the conservatory in Istanbul and the theaters, so, and forming a lot of musicians there. A lot of American composers were his teachers, were his students. So his figure was really remarkable. He had a little trouble, of course, during the Nazi time. That was one of the reasons, of course, he left, because his music was considered degenerate and, you know, criticized as many and put, you know, but it was a little ambivalent in many ways there. So it's something even more complex. But he wrote operas, concertos, chamber music, and he somehow built his own style. You know, when we think about Hindemith, it's hard to connect him to some other big, you know, tranche of music. Hindemith is his own, and he fused the contrapoint of the German tradition with a more expressionistic way to express that, with the love of chamber music. Really a remarkable musician. He was also a famous conductor, so he had everything. Just, you know, a wonderful man and a wonderful musician.
Yeah, one of a kind. He also did premiere this concerto himself. So, yeah, this one was composed in 1935 and premiered the same year. Its name comes from a German folk tune, actually, as does all of the movements of the piece. So there's 3 different movements in this piece, and each one references a specific German folk song. So the movements are, number 1 is Between the Mountain and the Deep Valley. I'm not going to attempt the German for these movements. Number 2 is Now Grow the Leaves, Little Linden Tree Grow Leaves, and also The Cuckoo Sat on the Fence. And the 3rd movement, which is the one that gives its name to the concerto, is Aren't You the Swan Turner? Now, Simeone, what is a swan turner?
So the swan turner is the person who is roasting a swan, is turning the how you call the grill, you know, make sure that, but in medieval tradition, or even later than medieval, you know, the people were some nomadic musicians who were singing around the different courts. They were using a kind of instrument that was kind of, imagine a kind of violin, even it was not a violin, but was a mechanical instrument where there was like something that was turned, and through that turn, then the strings of that violin and the notes were produced. So swan turner, in that case, is the musician, the poet, the romantic figure of this, you know, characters like minstrels. They were going around and singing and, you know, making a living being a musician in that time with this weird instrument.
I relate. Speaking of the instruments, so this concerto, when performed with the orchestra, has a really interesting instrumentation. It lacks the upper strings. The instrumentation doesn't have violin and viola parts. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit about what the advantages to doing something like that would be for a viola concerto.
Yeah. The viola sound is warmer, darker, but it's not as brilliant as the violins, of course. You know, the strings are different and the range is different. So it was very smart, I think, by Hindemith to don't have violins and violas, because then the sound of the viola is not covered. It doesn't need to battle with anything that is either similar, like other violas, or is brighter, like the violins.
Mm-hmm.
So in that aspect, of course, it solved the balance issue brilliantly.
Yeah, I always think that sort of the violin and viola are always grouped together as upper strings and the cello and bass as lower strings, but it's very much that the violin and the cello have a similar sound, like you're talking about, much brighter, sharper. It comes through the texture a little bit easier, where the viola and the bass have a much similar sound, which is much richer and warmer and rounder and can be more ambient. And so it's easier to sort of lose that texture in the rest of the orchestra. I don't know. I always think of that similarity. Fabulous. What a good program we have coming up. Very exciting. Do you have any thoughts you want to add? We've got two other pieces on the program. We've got a group doing Bach, right?
Yeah, we have a Bach most favorite, Jesu, man's desire. Say it right in English. I never say right.
Joy of man's desiring.
That again?
Jesu, joy of man's desiring.
Yes. And the Offenbach Bacarolle. These are two new projects, so they are, premiere at this concert, like also the viola. But they are tile orchestras, as you know. We cannot play together yet. We are coming close, though, so everybody's getting their shot. So we are, we can't wait to get back to normals as soon as possible. So these are tile orchestras. That means every musician records his own parts. And then we had an engineer, Eric Dunford, who is a wonderful help now with the orchestra, and also we have Getty. What was his name? I forgot his first name. Steve Getty. So they put together these pieces with. It's a lot of work behind the scene, because you see them all together and it looks like it's an orchestra. They all play together and they put it together. No. This is one by one element that then an engineer needs to put together and balance, volume of sounds. Often intonation is fine, but even that could be a problem. Some mics, internet velocity and things like that. Also, basically, the engineer needs to do what the conductor job is. That is, where is the melody? What should be out, how more or less? And so it requires really a level of surgery, technical surgery behind that. It's hard to imagine when you just see the final product. So we really need to thank Steve and Eric for doing such a wonderful job and such a longer job.
Absolutely. It's from I like that, the thing that you said about the engineer sort of doing the conductor's job in a way, with mixing it and getting that balance to be right. It's such a weird experience doing a tile orchestra from the musician's perspective, because what happens is you would prepare a video for the orchestra, and so as an orchestra member, you get this video, and it's the conductor conducting the music without music or to a recording, sometimes just depending on who's doing it. There's always a moment beforehand, you watch the video, where there's either like everyone has to clap together at the same moment, or snap, or make some sort of sound to give the engineer a point to line up all the videos at. And then you record your part, which requires both watching the video, and if it's to a specific recording, listening to the recording as you're playing. And it's such an antithetical experience from what it normally would be in the hall, where you've got everybody, and kind of like we were talking about with the choirs, it's such a live experience. It's so exciting. You've got your stand part, you've got your section, you've got the bigger section, you've got just everybody's there, the conductor's there, you're feeding off that energy. It's the opposite of that. You're alone in your music room with your iPad and the part and the phone with the sound. You're working all these devices. It's very technological. It's very 2020, 2021 in that way. And you, of course, have to run the piece, and then you get to the end and you watch it back, which is always excruciating, watching yourself, play alone. You hear every moment, every last little weird string noise or sound or intonation that in a section would just blend away, but on your own is just so prominent, and you just record it many times until you finally get tired of it and send it in. At least that's been my experience with doing tile orchestras. They're a lot of work.
But the good thing is that we have a lot of bloopers that we are collecting at the end. I know Eric want to make something with all our mistakes, you know. So we have planned. I did plan it myself with my introductions and my thing. So I can't wait to see that thing, you know, with all the mistakes we all did together.
It's a very humbling experience. I know with the podcast, I never watch it all the way back until after the concert, where it's too late to go back and be like, oh, I didn't like the way I said that thing. Let's redo it. So thank you so much, Simeone, for being here today. I just want to say really quick, obviously, thank you so much to our audience for sitting with us today through the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider contributing to the orchestra financially this year if you can. We rely on donations from our patrons this season, as we don't have any ticket revenue coming in and we're not charging anything for our concerts. If you cannot donate, we understand it's such a tough time financially for a lot of people. Please consider sharing this video out with your friends and family, any music lovers in your life who might enjoy it. Like this video, it helps it appear on more people's feeds in the algorithm. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you again for being with us, and we hope you enjoy our concert.